What's good? It's Woog. We've got Jake Paul, 11 wins and 1 loss, taking on Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., 54 wins, 6 losses, 1 draw, and 1 no contest. The Jake Paul saga continues. Most recently with you could call it a bit of a sham of a fight, given that Mike Tyson was in his late 50s for that fight. And Jake Paul has been on this magic carpet ride where his level of opposition, generally, there have been these, kind of setbacks opponent wise. Like he had to get that Mike Tyson money. That was just inevitably going to be a stop on this journey. But he has gotten better in opponent selection overall. Starting with going from fighting YouTubers and NBA players to fighting a non-striking MMA fighter who was a 170-pound guy. By the way, Ben Askren is in pretty dire straits health-wise, so prayers go out to Ben Askren. But that was Jake Paul's 3rd fight. Then he fought Tyron Woodley in those back-to-back fights. Now, Tyron Woodley also an MMA fighter, but although he was a wrestler by trade, he had hands. He stopped Robbie Lawler, who had hands. So by MMA standards, Woodley was a good striker. And say what you want in hindsight, now that we've seen Jake Paul over the course of the last few years, beating Nate Diaz, dropping Anderson Silva in the late rounds and getting a win over Anderson the Spider Silva. Yes, Silva was in his late 40s, but I find Anderson Silva to be the greatest MMA striker of all time. So as we've seen Jake Paul over the years, now we could say, oh yeah, it only makes sense that he would have beaten Woodley by decision in the first fight and knocking him out cold in the rematch. But at the time, the idea that this YouTuber, right, who first shocked us knocking out Nate Robinson, the NBA player or former NBA player, and it was also pretty shocking to see the way that he dropped Ben Askren. Ben Askren's been in the ring with a lot of vicious strikers over the years. He couldn't make it out of the first round against Jake Paul. So hindsight 2020 vision, it turns out Jake Paul has been taking boxing super seriously and has also been developing new tools along the way. Like, I feel like with each of these Jake Paul fights, generally, he has shown us a different wrinkle in his game. So you could still look at him like he's some sort of a promotional clown or whatever, but in my view, he's been putting the work in, and not only does he have to promote these events, which he does a tremendous job doing for every one of these events, but at the end of the day, he's got to go in the ring and he's got to perform, right? Because if he gets smoked by somebody, it's party's over with the Jake Paul experience. So I like to give Jake Paul credit and have been along the way. No, I don't think he's ever going to get in the ring with a Zordo Ramirez. And quite frankly, Chris Mannix's take on this, because we've got Zordo Ramirez on this undercard. We've also got Floyd Schofield versus Tevin Farmer. This is actually a really good fight card. It's going to be at the Honda Center in Anaheim. I'm actually looking to get tickets to attend this one. But Chris Mannix takes it way too far in suggesting that he's got Zordo on the card because he's going to fight or is looking to fight Zordo Ramirez either next or down the road. I don't think that come on, we've got a 6'3" great boxer, lefty, bigger than Jake Paul generally. Hell no, Jake Paul's not going to fight Zordo Ramirez. Look at the trajectory that he's on. He's fighting Nate Diaz, Mike Tyson, 50-something-year-old Mike Tyson. Zordo Ramirez is a current unified champion. So no, I don't think that Jake Paul's that good or will ever be that good. But he's a lot better than I think any of us thought that he would be. Can we at least give him that? And he's been doing a great job at elevating women's boxing. Look at what he's done with Amanda Serrano. He's since had some very good signings, Alicia Baumgartner among them. But Jake Paul was fighting YouTubers, then he was fighting MMA fighters. All the while, we've been calling out, why doesn't he fight any professional boxers? Well, now he's fought 2. Andre August and Ryan Borland. No, they aren't world beaters. Andre August has a pretty good amateur career and had a record of like 10 or 11-1 at the time that he fought Jake Paul. And don't forget, Jake Paul does have that loss to Tommy Fury, an actual boxer. No, not a world title contender, but an actual boxer. That was a close fight, competitive fight. I thought Jake Paul rallied pretty well late and hurt Tommy Fury, or at least dropped Tommy Fury. But Tommy Fury won that one via close decision. Jake Paul has since fought 2 more professional boxers. That's if you don't consider Anderson Silva a professional boxer. And obviously Mike Tyson was a professional boxer who had been out of the ring for like 20 years, right? I don't count his return against Roy Jones Jr., who I believe dropped a decision against Showtime Pettis, which is probably the most embarrassing boxing versus MMA fighter in a boxing ring that has taken place since Jake Paul's opponent here, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., lost a decision to Anderson Silva, which we're going to get back to. But Jake Paul did fight 2 more pro boxers, and he smoked them both in the first round. And look at that uppercut that he hit Andre August with. That was beautifully delivered. And that's not even his signature punch. His signature punch is that right hand. He's gotten a better jab over the years. I mean, at least against lower level fighters. Again, I mean, when he's in there with MMA fighter / bare knuckle brawler Mike Perry, yeah, that jab is popping and he's able to maintain range. Can he do the same against a former middleweight champion, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who, I mean, you want to talk about a fall from grace in terms of what your overall reputation is, which we'll also get to. But I am curious to see how these Jake Paul skills, including that newly developed, in my view, newly developed left hook that he showed against Nate Diaz, dropping him with a left hook. Again, it's not his signature right hand that he dropped Nate Diaz with. It was that left hook, at least for one of those 2 knockdowns. So again, I'm seeing new developments out of Jake Paul. He's putting in the work. And now he's going to be fighting Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who again was a respected, dangerous, big middleweight who's beaten Marco Antonio Rubio, Andy Lee, Peter Manfredo Jr. Like, he's got some quality wins, and he became middleweight champion, defended it successfully multiple times. I mean, he's got a stoppage over Andy Lee, although if you ask Emmanuel Stewart, there were questionable happenings around not taking certain drug tests around that time. Go look up that Emmanuel Stewart interview after that fight took place, because Andy Lee, I believe at the time, was trained by Emmanuel Stewart. So check that out. But Chavez Jr., first of all, got a lot of gimme fights early. Like, he padded his record. He was like 30 something to 0 before he fought anybody with a name. But then he started fighting fighters with names, and he still looked good, stopping most of his opponents. And again, he was a big middleweight who had a granite chin like his pops and would be able to march his opponents down and threw big shots to the body and up top. Even in his first professional loss, when he lost his title to Sergio Martinez, a really good fighter who, I mean, he's the one who knocked Paul Williams out cold and has quality wins throughout his career. When Chavez Jr. lost to Sergio Martinez, Martinez was just way craftier. He was moving around the ring. He was tricky, changing levels, just a very good and very athletic fighter. So Sergio Martinez was winning the vast majority of the rounds and then got hurt badly, almost got stopped towards the end of the fight. So even in that fight, Chavez Jr. finished super strong and had Sergio Martinez in all types of trouble by the end of that one. But that was Chavez Jr.'s first loss. Then he started missing weight. He would go up to 168, miss weight against Brian Vera. Like the first fight against Brian Vera, I thought that Brian Vera got robbed and should have won against Chavez Jr. in their first fight. Chavez Jr. did better in the rematch, but he missed weight, and so they had it at like a catch weight, and I think Chavez Jr. even missed that catch weight. So this is where he started really developing the reputation of a flaky fighter. And then after that, he started missing weight so badly, he just bypassed 168, went to 175 light heavyweight, fights Andres Fonfara, a really good fighter, not a champion, but a championship level fighter, a title challenger who would eventually get upset big time by Joe Smith Jr. And that's what launched Joe Smith Jr. Before Joe Smith Jr. knocked Bernard Hopkins out of the ring. His big coming out party was that big upset. Look at what the odds were for Fonfara versus Joe Smith Jr. Yeah, the public just didn't know that this guy could hit like a bull. But Andres Fonfara was a pretty good fighter, has some good wins throughout his career. And since Chavez Jr. was so negligent in his training and was just jumping divisions by this point, yeah, he ran into Fonfara, got outboxed, and then got stopped in the 9th round. That was the beginning of the end for Chavez Jr. He would fight Canelo 3 fights later, but that was because Canelo wanted to fight a big name. In fact, I think that my first boxing breakdown / prediction was in 2017, and I wasn't regular at this time. I would just be doing fights here and there, like I did Terrence Crawford versus Amir Khan, And I think I did like the rematch between Triple G and Canelo. But Canelo versus Chavez Jr. I think was my first breakdown, and I actually picked Chavez Jr. to pull off the upset. I thought that Canelo was in over his skis fighting Chavez Jr. at 164. I thought that Chavez Jr. knew the importance and the magnitude of this opportunity, of this Mexican versus Mexican fight, where he is Chavez's son and he's fighting the other greatest Mexican fighter of all time. Maybe not by that point, but Canelo was on his way. So I thought that Chavez Jr. would pull it off. It wasn't the case. He pretty much just got beaten up and he hardly engaged. He wasn't there to beat Canelo. He was just walking backwards into the ropes, getting beat on from pillar to post. Canelo won an easy unanimous decision and then called out Triple G. But that was just another symptom of how steep the decline for Chavez Jr. was. And he wouldn't return to the ring for another couple of years. 2 fights later, he lost to Daniel Jacobs. You know, that might have been the last time he looked a little bit scary. Like in the first round, he came right at Jacobs, throwing bombs, like looking to get Jacobs out of there probably in the first couple of rounds. Well, it didn't work. He did put a lot of pressure on him, but he quit by like the 5th round. But it was the very next fight against Mario Cazares that really kind of spelled the end of Chavez Jr.'s reputation, because he quit with a cut in the 6th round of that 10-rounder in Tijuana, Mexico. And that's the one that totally turned the public, the Mexican public included, off on Chavez Jr. Like, he by that point had become like the biggest boxing disappointment. And it was 2 fights after that that he lost, not get challenged, but lost a split decision to MMA fighter, former UFC great Anderson Silva. And that is just, you know, in this whole boxing versus MMA thing, like I was saying, it's one thing if you get tested, like, you know, some boxers look like, oh, you know, that MMA fighter looked like he gave you some issues there, but you pulled it off. But to be the boxer, I mean, if you go into the octagon, of course, you're probably going to lose in there. You're going to get choked out, leg kicked, whatever. But to lose to an MMA fighter in a boxing ring when you're the boxer, that's about as bad as it gets. And that happened with Anderson Silva versus Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. So yes, Chavez Jr. has won his next couple fights after that. He recently beat a former UFC fighter, Uriah Hall, who actually has a win over Anderson Silva. I think that was Anderson Silva's last UFC fight. But Chavez Jr. beat Uriah Hall via 6-round unanimous decision. But that's not convincing enough for me. Yo, when I look at Jake Paul versus Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., I look at one person who's got good training habits against somebody who's got terrible training habits. And it's one of those fool me once, fool me 2 times, 3 times, however many times. You might be sold on the redemption of Chavez Jr. I just haven't seen enough evidence. And, you know, I see him in interviews, and he just, in the words of, you know, Logan Roy on Succession, he doesn't strike me as a serious person. Chavez Jr. just doesn't. So I can't, as much as on paper he should have a good chance at not only pushing, but maybe even beating Jake Paul, I'm just not convinced. I just can't see it. I can't take him seriously and his career and his abilities in the ring right now seriously enough to think that he's got a real shot here. Like, maybe if he catches Paul with something big in the 1st, 2nd round, maybe if he just comes in guns blazing and Jake Paul gets caught slipping and gets hit hard and rocked and maybe stopped, that is the chance that Chavez Jr. has. Because once a boxing fight breaks out, believe it or not, I think it's going to be Jake Paul winning those boxing rounds. Like, by this point, I think he's developed a stronger skill set than Chavez Jr. When Chavez Jr. was at his best, yes, he could jab to the body. He could put that intelligent pressure and then start wearing on his opponents. But keep in mind, that was all back at 160. He didn't look great at 168 when he was fighting Brian Vera in those back-to-back fights. He sure as hell didn't look good at 175 when he was getting stopped by Andres Fonfara. And now against Jake Paul, he's going to be fighting him at about 200 pounds. So yeah, Chavez Jr. was a big middleweight. He might look like he kind of puts on the weight somewhat well because he's got pretty big dimensions and he's got a really big head, always had a really big head. But if you're not stopping Uriah Hall in a boxing ring, Uriah Hall, again, a 185 guy, what are you gonna do with Jake Paul, who I would pick to beat Uriah Hall in a boxing fight? I don't think he's going to stop Jake Paul. And if you're not stopping Jake Paul and you're losing a close decision to Anderson Silva, I just don't see how Chavez Jr., first of all, he's got a really good chin, right? I've said that before. But does he have a good enough chin to take a hard right hand from a true 190 to 200 pounder? Also, where's his gas tank? Like, is he going to be able to put on sustained pressure? Yes, 2 fights ago, he won a 10-round unanimous decision against David Zagara, and he did fight in a loss, the 8-round distance against Anderson Silva. But in this 10-rounder against Jake Paul, who, yes, he does have his own fatigue issues in the back half of fights, but his power also seems to carry late. Like, he stopped Michael Perry in the 6th round. He, again, finished strong in the 8-rounder against Tommy Fury, and he finished strong dropping Anderson Silva in their 8-rounder. So maybe he can't drop or stop, even though I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in this fight, he actually puts Chavez Jr. on his butt. Look, when it comes to the ability to just go out there and perform, to do your job, I have more faith in Jake Paul than I do Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Jake Paul's been carrying the pressure, carrying the weight for some time now. Chavez Jr. has been looking for the way out in a lot of these instances. So even if a battle of attrition is what transpires, I'm going with the guy who's showing that he might be tougher than Chavez Jr. And not for nothing, Jake Paul's got a pretty good chin himself. I saw him get rocked against Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva dropped his head and threw some nasty left hands. Jake Paul took it pretty well. I thought that Tommy Fury landed some nice clean shots against Jake Paul. I thought Jake Paul took those pretty well. So again, is this middleweight going to be able to go up and hurt Jake Paul? You know, I thought Tyron Woodley might have rocked Jake Paul in their first fight, and Tyron Woodley spent his MMA career at 170, which is still 10 pounds higher than where Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. fought, even though, again, he was a very large middleweight. So look, the size goes to Jake Paul, period. Because again, Chavez Jr. has shown me nothing really above 160, definitely nothing above 168. I'm going to go Jake Paul, and I think he's going to get a knockdown, not a stoppage, but I think that he's going to win a 10-round decision against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., which, again, it would be pretty embarrassing because Chavez Jr. is the boxer here. But we're going to have to start looking at Jake Paul as a boxer. Look, I don't think Jake Paul can beat, you know, a prime Andres Fanfara. Like, let me be clear. I don't think that he probably doesn't beat anybody in the Cruiserweight top 10. I know that he's starting to call out Bout Jack. That looks like if he's going to challenge for a Cruiserweight title, it's going to probably be against Bout Jack. If Bout Jack can get through what I think is going to be a rematch of his last fight, which was a close and competitive fight that really could have gone either way. But if Jake Paul is going to call his shot at a Cruiserweight title, I think it's going to be against a older than 40-year-old. Kind of sticks with the Jake Paul theme here, right? Look at his opponents, Anderson Silva, Mike Tyson. I think it will be against the old guy, Bout Jack, who himself was probably at his best at 168, although he was also pretty good at 175, and again, beat Ilunga Jr. Makabu for that Cruiserweight title. So props to Bout Jack, but Jake Paul to me doesn't beat Bout Jack if they were to fight. I don't think he beats Bout Jack, but I do think he beats former middleweight champion Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. And again, I'm taking him via decision. But let me know your thoughts on all this in the comments, and we'll see where Jake Paul goes from here if he beats Chavez Jr. No Chris Mannix. I don't think it's Zurdo Ramirez. Jake Paul, he might be a little crazy, but he's not stupid. He's not. There's nothing that he has to the granite chin, super experience. I mean, the guy's Zurdo's only lost a decision to Dimitri Bivol. You know, he just beat Billum Smith. You know what I'm saying? Jake Paul to me does not beat Billum Smith. Jake Paul doesn't beat Lawrence Okoli. Jake Paul doesn't beat Richard Riakporhe. Jake Paul doesn't belong in the ring, in my view, with any of those guys. But again, I think he beats Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on all this in the comments. And again, this is a pretty deep fight card. I'm probably going to do a Zurdo versus Dorticos and Floyd Schofield versus Tevin Farmer fight preview before this week is up. And again, I'm going to try to go to this fight at the Honda Center in Anaheim. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on Jake Paul versus Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.